Hello and welcome to Brainz Talk with me, your host, Mihal. Today I'm joined by behavioural coach and creator of the Take One Moment method, Aran Bray. Today we'll be talking about human behaviour, why capable people stay stuck, and the gap between knowing and doing. Aran Bray, welcome to Brainz Talk.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here.
How are you today?
I'm really well, thank you. Really well.
Good stuff. So I would love to start with your own personal journey just to kick everything off, because you've spent years in engineering leadership before moving into behavioral coaching. Firstly, what sparked that interest in human behavior and what led you to focus on this gap that I just mentioned between knowing and doing?
Yeah, it doesn't seem a natural jump, does it, from engineering to coaching? I've been in engineering. Engineering has been my career for 35 years, all various levels. And the thing I noticed over the years of working with people is that when you're working with all manner of people, all different levels, people rarely do what they know. And working in an engineering environment, obviously my job really is fixing problems. So whether it's a process, whether it's a product, whether it's an account or a person, it's just getting in there and finding what the solution is. But what became more and more apparent, regardless really of where I worked or who I worked with, and I include absolutely myself in this, is that people rarely do follow through continually doing what they actually know. They know how to fix it, they know what the problems are, but for some reason there's a gap and it doesn't happen.
So, like you've just mentioned, a lot of your work is built around this simple but really powerful idea that people often know exactly what they should do, but they really struggle to act on it and do it. Why do you think so many capable people get stuck despite having all this knowledge and all this insight?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? First of all, I think there's a couple of things. One, I think societally, we're very narrow on where we think stuck is. We tend to look at stuck as burned out, as the end of the sticks. So, but more often than not, people are stuck when you find that you're saying same thing, same day, I'm fine. They're all indicators of being relatively stuck in something. So the interesting thing is noticing that and looking at what the stories are that have created that position in life, or finances, or relationships, or work, and then just basically asking if those stories are actually true, because more often than not these things are carried through, and then you sit with it and you believe it's you, whereas your capability is way beyond the story that you work within. So in terms of getting stuck, I think more often than not you're looking backward at what you've done, where you failed before, what hasn't occurred. And then you're kind of validating your own story that that's not for you. I can't do this. I shouldn't expect more. So I think that's, where people get stuck. It's wrapped up in that story and really not seeing the moments where they go through old patterns that, of course, are keeping them stuck or not serving them.
Interesting, really fascinating stuff. And now you've created the Take One Moment, or TOM for short. For those hearing about this for the first time, can we firstly dive into what is it?
Yeah, well, TOM is the gateway into Be Outstanding. So it's the outstanding method, and the skill of that is take one moment. And the idea of take one moment really it's not a new idea. It's based on the famous Viktor Frankl gap between stimulus and reaction, but it's actually taking it from philosophy into practical frameworks and looking for that moment where you are triggered, stimulated to move to a reaction. Because more often than not, people, they gloss through it, and life seems to be getting faster and faster, so it's easier to pass that moment. But there's always a moment where something will occur. You'll get the text, the message will come through, somebody looks at you a certain way, and before you know it, you are responding in the same old pattern. And the reason for that, of course, is just that it's, neurons that fire together, wire together, and all of those things. So it's the path of least resistance, because we are, by very definition, kind of lazy, right? Our brains are actually, for all of what they can do, they're quite lazy. So they always go the fastest, easiest route. And that's the route that's been, of course, conditioned over, well, thousands of times or a couple of decades or however long it's taken to follow that same pathway. And every time that happens, before that moment, there is a feeling in the body, because you take the information on, there's a feeling, it might be a tightness in the chest, it might be a ringing in your ears, a clenching of anything, and suddenly that sets off the feeling in your body, which of course washes you with the chemicals, which then produces the reaction and therefore the behaviour. So if you can just notice that moment where there is, that feeling in your stomach or feeling in your chest, you don't have to necessarily correct it, but by noticing it, you give yourself just that fraction of a second for a choice to appear. And as I say, all you really have to do is notice it. So the moment you're kind of stimulated into a quick response, you're cut up in traffic, there's a feeling, and if you can just see that, it gives you enough space just for a decision that comes through. And of course, then that's an opportunity to go with something that is aligned with your real person, as opposed to a reaction of maybe the person that you want to get away from, that angry person.
Right.
So it's finding that moment. And if you can do that, it gives you an opportunity to make a deliberate choice as opposed to, an old pattern reaction.
I like that. Be deliberate, be intentional. When you were developing the Tom method, what problem were you trying to find a solution to with that in mind?
Do you know, it's funny. I've listened to a lot of podcasts and I've listened to a lot of people talking about different things, and there's more often than not always a catalyst moment, isn't there? But I think maybe I'm just a little slow. I think over my 50 years, there have been multiple moments, and they've been steadily trying to show me and push me toward noticing this point. And yes, I think there's been a number of challenges, as everybody in their life, peaks and troughs, but I steadily got to it, and it was kind of by trying different things, because I think, like a lot of people, I'm always trying to be better, and so it was a real trial and error moment, taking lots of courses, lots of studying and all these different things, and really trying to come up with what worked for me, because the truth is all of these systems work, but they don't necessarily all work for everybody, because we're not open at that moment to the particular nuance. So in my case, it was working towards, finding the moment, and the moment I did, it took the pressure off of myself. It enabled me to kind of step back out of the little bubble that had been created, and just, make the choice that was based on actually how I felt, who I was, and then things started to change. And just like a pebble in the pond, that's all it takes. It's just one, and it ripples to all the edges. And the more you do it, it's like anything, the more you work out, the stronger you get at finding it, and the stronger you get at finding it, the more decisions you can make. The more decisions you make, the easier it becomes, and suddenly you turn what was extremely difficult to move beyond in terms of a hesitation or overwhelm or overthinking. It becomes more natural to just lean in, and you get a different outcome.
Really, really insightful stuff. And one concept that sits at the heart of your work, and what you've mentioned already, is the moment before action. Why is that moment so important, and what is actually happening there that most people would never even notice or think of?
Yeah, well, that moment is where the pattern begins. That's where behaviour is chosen. So if you don't spot that moment, you're just running old lines. And of course, those old lines, in my case, I'm mid-50s. You could be in your mid-50s, but you're running the pattern that you learned when you were 10. And it's not serving you anymore. You've got to step away from that. So yeah, the reason the moment is really so important is because that's the root of the behavioural pattern. And that's your opportunity to change it. Because you hear an awful lot, people say, I need more willpower, I need more motivation, but that's coming from the other end, trying to push it back into the box. If you can just see the moment and realise that I don't need motivation. I don't need willpower, because this is the decision I'm making to push forward to that person that I want to be. So, it makes it far easier because it takes less effort, because it's just a choice.
You make it sound so simple. You make it sound very accessible, which is great.
But it really is. It feels like it's hard, right? For anybody trying to give up a bad habit, like if you're a long-term smoker, it feels like I've been trying to give up smoking for maybe a decade. But the truth is, it was just a moment. There was a moment where you said, I'm not going to smoke anymore. Up until then, you've been thinking about that moment, but it only takes a moment. So it really is that easy, but it's finding that level of clarity around the decision that you really want to make. Rather than it being preferential, it needs to be decisive in terms of what you're after.
Okay. Now, I want to get this right. You've written that by the time people think they're making a decision, the response is often already shaped. Can you unpack what you've said a little bit for us?
Yeah. It's well, I put it to you. How often do you think you're making decisions?
All the time.
All
right?
the time, exactly. But if I say to you, when was the last time you were decisive? Does it feel different? Yeah, and yet really, that's the same thing, right? Decision and being decisive are the same thing. So I put it to you that just in today's fast world, because we're running, we run patterns for everything, like going to the toilet, you name it, right? We're run by little programs, little patterns. But if you start to think about your actual decisions, rather than I do this because I have to, they're not decisions, are they? They're actually autopilot preferences to keep you on that track going down your life. But if you was to take a day where you said, right, tomorrow, everything I do, I'm going to make a conscious decision as to whether or not I do it, and there was no consequences, your day tomorrow would be very different to every other day of your life. So that's the importance of the moment and the decision. And that's why I think most people, when I say the behaviour has already commenced, it's because they're operating on a preference as opposed to a truly conscious, decisive moment.
Okay, and many people are led to believe that their problem is motivation or discipline or I haven't got the willpower. You mentioned it before.
Yeah.
Why do you think those explanations often miss what's really going on inside somebody's head?
Yeah, well, we're storytelling beings, aren't we? We tell one another stories about why I got here late, why this happened, why it wasn't my fault. And of course we do that to ourselves all day long as to why we can't, why we should, why we shouldn't. And they sound compelling. They sound, genuine. So of course when it comes to motivation and willpower and all of these things, it's very easy to conjure a story. I worked hard yesterday, so today I deserve the cheesecake. I've done that too many times. but if you don't kind of step back and take that level of ownership for how you're behaving versus who you actually want to be, then these things can run a little bit ragged, and then you start to say, oh, this is how I am. Everybody knows how to lose, an easy one. Everybody knows how to lose weight. Everybody knows how to get fit, right? Because there's hundreds of different ways to get fit. But knowing it doesn't mean that's what you do, because somebody will conjure a story that I don't have the time, or I don't have something near me, or there's good, compelling, totally reasonable reasons. But the question is, are they really true? They're true in the moment because it meets the need. I don't really want to take ownership for not having enough time. So, well, I have to do this and I have to do that and I have to get here and I have to be there. So it enables you to kind of step out of your own responsibility, which, by the same token, gives you a good feeling that you're not actually being bad to yourself.
It's such an interesting way to look at it. The perspective is everything there.
I missed, going back a few years, I missed too many of my lads' performances at school. But in my mind, I have to do the work, I have to bring in the money, I have to do these things, they're all perfectly valid reasons, and and 90% of other people would be doing probably the same, but it didn't make me feel good, because the truth is, what I wanted to do was to be there, cheering and clapping. So they're the kind of shifts that you can make, and of course, yes, it comes with a level of sacrifice, but so did the other decision that I didn't feel I actually made. I went to work, I sacrificed not going to the event. So you're making these sacrifices unconsciously, but when you think about making those decisions and then you start to consider the sacrifices, obviously it feels probably a little too much. That's why you can't do it. That's why you need the story. But I think when you get a little more honest with how you want to be, who you want to be, where you want to go, the decisions just come easier.
Yeah, great stuff. I now want to talk about one of your articles that anyone listening and watching can check out. It is what happens just before you don't do what you said you should. What have you discovered about that moment, and why, for all the people listening and watching, why does it even matter?
Well, the reason it matters is what I've just said about doing what you want to do. It's very easy to, I think, let's take happiness. What do you want to be? Oh, I want to be happy. But really, happiness is a byproduct of doing what you want to do. For some people, happiness is going to come on the back of skydiving. For other people, that's not me. I'd be pretty terrified. But it's a byproduct of doing what you want to do. So, why should people, or why don't people do what they know they should do? Is, as I say, that's the pattern running formation. It's getting caught up in perhaps the story, perhaps the outside environment of push, get what you need to have. Whereas if you just take a moment and say, in this moment, actually, who do I want to be, or who do I want to be going forward, and then you can start to take those steps and progressive movements to become that person, which is going to bring you more of what you actually want in terms of the joy of life, the experience. Otherwise, you're kind of constantly pushing against the pressures of life, trying to then find an element of joy in it. So yeah, with regard to that article, it's really based around that moment and getting, I think, caught up in the environment as opposed to kind of your inner world. And the reason I say that is because what I found personally, when I started to make these changes in my life, was that I didn't make the choices initially because I was fearful of the sacrifices that would occur. I might lose my job, I might lose this, I might lose that. But what I actually found by reprioritizing my life and working to those priorities as opposed to what I felt I had to do was that I created time because my energy was so much higher because I was hitting the ping points of my life that suddenly I was able to do 4 hours of work in 2 hours. I was able to go and see the recital. I was able to go and do these things. And life just changes around you because you are somewhat more clear. You have greater clarity on what brings your purpose. And of course, what brings my purpose isn't going to be the same for everybody else, but the process is the exact same. So if you can start to adopt these kind of thought processes into your life about what do I really want, what are my priorities, what am I not doing that I know I should be doing, what's the conversation I know I'm avoiding, what's the all of these things, and you can start to tackle those, many of them extremely uncomfortable, but when you do it, the burden is lifted and life just changes, and it just changes around you. And the best part of all is that the better you isn't just better for you, it's better for everybody that you're connected to, and everyone responds to that.
I love that. Really, really inspiring stuff. Thank you so much. I know we're not even close to finishing, but thank you for being so open and honest. It's really important stuff. Now, your articles are fantastic. We just talked about one, but I want to dive into another where you say that overthinking isn't a thinking problem.
Yeah.
It might confuse people listening or watching. Can you dive in and elaborate a wee bit more?
Well, I mean, we're all good at thinking.
Yeah.
Right? So why on earth would we think that thinking is the way out of overthinking? You know, because overthinking is a process of adding layers and layers and layers and layers. So if you imagine, one of the sketches that I do is a pyramid. So an event occurs that you take a thought on. So somebody might say, do you want to come to the party? Ah, do I want to go to the party? And then you think, oh, it's on Friday. I normally do this on Friday. I normally do this. What if I go and they're there? And what's this? And before you know it, you're kind of building this pyramid down, you know, with all of these layers of possibilities. And before you know it, you've got 1,000 images, possibilities, possible outcomes, of which, you know, at best, only one could be true. So thinking really isn't the way out of overthinking. It's decision. It's action. And it doesn't even have to be the right action. Yeah, an action just takes you out of that loop. And the moment you do, you're beyond the overthinking. So the better you can get at decision making, the less overthinking, you know, or the easier it is to get out of overthinking. And of course, we all do it. I was doing plenty of overthinking coming to this podcast. But the truth of the matter is, you know, you just have to walk in and do it. And the overthinking immediately stops because suddenly you're in another loop.
That loop concept that you spoke about is so fascinating because it's like, what's the right decision? And then you start adding layers on top, but it's like, commit to one, get all those. Sometimes we can have just too much choice, and the less choice, the better. So I'm glad that this idea that I've had is backed up by you, an industry professional. So it's really good because sometimes you can feel like, as you say, this pyramid, what if, should I do this, should I do that? Just stick to one and go for it. You know, the wrong choice is the one that you don't make.
Absolutely.
So just make it.
Yeah, the only failure is not pulling the trigger, isn't it? You know, it's not trying at all.
I love that.
It's crazy. I think anybody listening, the amount of opportunities, just think back over the last 10 years of your life. How many opportunities have you missed because you simply thought too much about it, and then the window's closed? You know, so just for anybody who's listening, you know, if you can do one thing, you know, just start making more decisions, get out there and push forward and see what happens, because a different response will always generate a different outcome.
Exactly. Now, staying on that theme of being aware and awareness, because it's something we hear a lot about in personal development, right? But you've said that awareness alone just isn't enough. It's not going to cut it. Why is understanding a pattern so different from actually maybe just changing it?
Yeah. I mean, awareness is crucial. Awareness is step one. But yeah, I think it gets pushed as the answer. What you need is more awareness, and that's great. You do. You know, you need to see the tiger in the grass. But if you just stand there and look at the tiger, you're going to get eaten. So awareness must be followed with decision, direction, action. You know, that's why it's not enough. It's absolutely crucial. Same with trying to find that moment in your body. You know, it's where do I feel something a little different in my body? That's the awareness of self. But then you have to do something about it. You know, so yeah, I'm all for presence. I'm all for awareness. It's absolutely, it brings vibrance to life, you know, without doubt. But if you don't then choose to do something, what's the point?
100%. Now back to your writing, because you've also written about imposter syndrome and self-respect. When someone's constantly doubting themselves or being hard or maybe negotiates with their own standards, what's really happening beneath the surface? Because there's layers here. What's really happening?
Yeah, well, that comes down to meaning, because we talk about imposter syndrome as though it's something that some people have. You know, it's something that we all have. You know, it's absolutely true. But so self-doubt isn't the problem. You know, we're humans and we self-doubt all the time. But it's what meaning you attach to it. And if you and I go and see the same movie, and you know, I might thoroughly enjoy it, you might hate it. There's nothing wrong with the movie, and that's the same when it comes to self-respect, self-doubt. You know, it's just the meaning that you attach to it. So it's very easy to take particularly with imposter syndrome or a level of self-respect, and come to the conclusion that you're not enough. That's way too common. But it's not true. That's the question I would pose to the person. Is that true? Let's look at your life. Let's look at what you've done. Is that true? Are you not enough? Because there's always reasons to say, yeah, I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I can't do it. But there's always evidence, because you wouldn't be here if you weren't enough. You've whatever you've gone through, you've survived and you've made it to the other side. So you're clearly more than enough. And I personally think that's where a lot of imposter syndrome comes down to. It's just the meaning that's attached to it. And if you can, I think, settle with the idea that self-doubt is perfectly okay. It's natural. But I'm going to do the thing anyway. And that's the key. It's a decision. Again, it comes back to a decision to get you out of that loop.
I was just engaged, really enjoying that. Really, really good stuff. I'd love to bring the conversation now into leadership. When leaders are under pressure, how do automatic behaviors or maybe conditioned responses affect things like decision making, communication, and maybe just general performance?
Yeah, well, I think pressure amplifies all of that element, doesn't it? So if there's any kind of insecurity, being in a room where the pressure is amplified is going to bring that to the surface. So it's going to make people react even faster. So again, a good leader, a good team, good people are the people who can just settle and not react. That's really the key to that aspect of leadership. So yes, if you're if you're in a leadership team where you're very reactive to the environment, your energy is going to spill out into the team, and the team is going to become very active or very defensive, or it's just going to be mirrored throughout. So yeah, it's a case of really, regardless of the level of pressure, it's trying to bring that moment of clarity and clear decision making to continue to press forward.
For teams or leaders looking to improve, what's one practical way that they can maybe create more space between stimulus and response so that they can be more intentional or act more deliberately?
Yeah, I think in a team environment, really, to get the most out of a team, really everybody has to be on that same page. It's you see it all the time in football. You can have a great bunch of players who are really gelled together, and it flows. Whereas you can have a team that has 4 or 5 superstars, and they seem to be disjointed. So for any kind of team, leadership team, or a team under a leader, the more honest you can be with one another about, what is the problem with this team? What do we need to address? You need to take it to a point of pointing at the issue so that it can be cleared, as opposed to pointing at the person. Because it's a story issue, not a personal issue, because it's a team and we're here to work together. So it's not a case of, I don't like your blue jumper. It comes down to, right, let's look at the task and what do we actually need to do this. So I think a level of honesty and clarity are what key to making a team successful.
Okay, looking ahead now into the future, we're living in a world that's increasingly shaped by technology and AI, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever. Why do you believe that skills like self-regulation, clarity, and conscious decision-making will become even more valuable in these years ahead?
Yeah, well, I personally think, this means a lot to me. It's something that I've been working on. But we now live in a world where general knowledge is free, right? But we've come from a world where general knowledge is what builds the hierarchy. The smarter people tell us what to do, where to go, how to be. Whereas now, it's down to it's 2 things. It's asking better questions, which really is kind of goes back to Tom and Be Outstanding in terms of self-questions. Ask yourself a better question to get a better answer. But that's the case with technology where we stand at the moment. You know, it's very easy to ask the AI system what the weather's like today, but that's a poor question, you know, because you can ask it to sort your finances out. You can ask it to do all manner of things that actually can have a massive impact in your life in seconds as opposed to weeks or hours. So that's only going to get better and better. So as we go forward, I think that the second part of that is that it's going to become far more important to be a better human, because if all of the knowledge is being taken away in terms of its value, then behaviour, emotional regulation is going to be absolutely key in going forward, because that's what's going to enable people under the higher pressure. Because with the ChatGPT and Claude and things, the answers are immediate, and you know, whereas that would have taken in an engineering team, that might have taken 3, 4, 5 months, but now we're getting it in the afternoon. So pressure is going to be ramped up massively. So the ability to control your emotions and stay in the room, stay in the pattern, stay in the progress of the projects, I think is going to be absolutely paramount. And going forward 5, 10 years, I think the edge, what was a high level of knowledge, you know, the edge going forward is going to be a high level of emotional regulation, because that's going to be what separates you from everything else.
I love that. That's great. And I want to ask now, if we think about the people and the organizations that you've worked with, what impact do you ultimately want to leave on all of those people with the Tom method?
Oh, I mean, can you just imagine the world just 2% better? Just 2% better than it is now. Imagine how life would be, right? Now, take out all the bad. You know, we're only talking about putting 2% on the good, of course, because there'd be no change. But just imagine if your day was 2% easier, if your weekends were just 2% better. You know, that compounding over 5 or 10 years, you know, life would be tremendously different, wouldn't it, globally? So, you know, I haven't got ideas of grandeur here, but the idea of just people being able to realise that they are capable of so much more than where they currently sit. And it really doesn't matter what your level is, what your circumstances are. Your ability is your creativity, and you know, that's your only limit. So if you can think about being an incredible life, then you can create an incredible life, because it's all within you, and a series of decisions. So, you know, I urge everybody to get clear on, and it can change day to day, but get really clear on what it is that you want. And every decision that you make, ask yourself, does this take me one step closer, one step sideways, or one step back? You know, sideways and closer, great. Back, think about it again. You know, do I want to do this? Because that's what's different. You know, it's not that they're not paying me enough. It's not that they won't let me out beyond 10 o'clock. You know, that they're just environmental rules. You know, your rules are the decisions that you make. So if you can take those moments and really feed yourself, not in a selfish way, but in a way that makes you your best version so that everybody benefits, then it's a win-win.
You said it. It feels like a privilege to sit and hear all this stuff. So thank you so much for sharing all this. I'm going to wrap up with a question, Aran, that we ask every one of our guests. Right. What mindset do you credit most for the success that you have today?
Oh, wow. What mindset do I credit most? Do you know, I think curiosity. I think when I think about some of the harder times that I've been through, where it's more of a struggle to see a way forward, it's always kind of, there's always been something that's floated in that's just kind of, oh, what's that? And before I know it, I've made a series of decisions, and I've followed something completely different, and it's taken me somewhere completely different. So, yeah, I think you know, that childlike curiosity, if you can hang on to that for as well, forever, but as long as you possibly can. You know, you don't have to use it every day, but just having it in your back pocket for when you need it, I think that's, you know, that's a skill worth hanging on to.
100%. Aaron, I want to thank you so much for this conversation. I've loved every second. Some fantastic stuff there. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks very much.
And to everyone watching, thank you so much. Until next time, take care. Bye bye.